Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at a case that has really kind of captured the public imagination for decades now,
Mm.
and that's the JonBenét Ramsey case.
Yeah, it's a story that just seems like it was ripped right from the headlines. A true crime novel brought to life. I mean, you've got a 6-year-old beauty
Yeah.
queen found murdered in her own home, and on Christmas, no less, a family that's completely torn apart by grief and suspicion, and then this mystery that, despite years and years of investigation and countless theories, still remains unsolved.
Yeah, and it's a story with so many layers and so many twists and turns that it's really easy to get lost in the details.
Mm.
So we're going to be looking at police reports and court documents today. We even have some insights from some of the investigators who worked the case.
Hmm.
And all of this is sort of pointing to different possible scenarios. So what we're going to try to do today is just kind of cut through all the noise and see if we can make any sense of this puzzle.
Yeah, and it is a real puzzle, for sure. There are some really baffling pieces to this, and it really all starts with that crime scene itself. It's December 26, 1990, Sark's the day after Christmas. The Ramsey family home in Boulder, Colorado, becomes the epicenter of this tragedy that would very soon grip the entire nation.
Okay, so walk us through that day. What exactly happened?
All right, so picture this. John and Patsy Ramsey wake up, and they find that their daughter, JonBenét, is missing from her bed. So, of course, they immediately start frantically searching the house, and what do they find? But a ransom note on the staircase. This handwritten rambling note demanding $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return.
A ransom note. So it sounds like maybe a kidnapping gone wrong.
Well, that's what everyone initially thought. The police arrived, and the investigation begins. The house is completely combed for clues, but then just hours later, the case takes this really horrific turn. John Ramsey, he's searching the basement, and he finds JonBenét's body, concealed in this small, rarely used room.
Oh my gosh. It's just hard to even imagine what must have been going through their minds at that moment.
I know it's a parent's worst nightmare. And on top of that, you have this mystery surrounding the whole thing. The autopsy revealed that JonBenét had been strangled, and she had also suffered a blow to the head. And adding to that, they found a garrote around her neck, which had been fashioned from a paintbrush handle and nylon cord.
Oh, wow. Those details are just the garrote, the ransom note. It just seems like something out of a movie. It's so disturbing.
Yeah.
So who did they initially suspect? Was it a targeted kidnapping that just went wrong?
Well, initially, yeah, the focus was on a possible intruder, but the crime scene itself raised more questions than answers. You see, there were no signs of forced entry, and the ransom note was unusually long, and it had been written on a notepad from the house.
Wait a minute. If there was no forced entry and the notepad came from the house, wouldn't that suggest that someone familiar with the family might be involved?
Exactly, and that is where the suspicion starts to shift toward the parents, John and Patsy Ramsey. The lack of forced entry, the strange ransom note. Investigators started to really scrutinize every aspect of the family's behavior and every inconsistency in their statements.
Yeah, I remember that. The media coverage was just relentless at the time. It seemed like every detail of their lives was being analyzed and debated.
Oh, the media scrutiny was intense, and it definitely played a role in kind of shaping public perception of the case. The Ramseys became the focal point of the investigation, and then, of course, several theories emerged to explain what might have happened.
Okay, so like what? What were some of the theories they were looking into?
Well, one of the more prominent theories focused on JonBenét's involvement in beauty pageants. Patsy Ramsey was a former beauty queen herself, and so people started accusing her of pushing her daughter too hard in that world. This theory suggested that all that pressure and stress might have led to some kind of tragic accident, or even maybe a violent outburst.
So they thought that maybe Patsy had accidentally heard JonBenét and then staged this whole kidnapping to cover it up.
Right. Another theory focused on JonBenét's alleged bedwetting. The idea there was that Patsy may have gotten frustrated with her daughter's bedwetting, and in a moment of frustration, she lashed out and accidentally killed her, and then panicked. And then both her and John concocted this elaborate kidnapping scenario.
But wouldn't forensic evidence have been able to confirm or deny those theories?
Well, you would think so, right? But it wasn't that simple. There was also this whole issue of the ransom note. Experts couldn't definitively say whether or not it was Patsy's handwriting, which just added another layer of doubt to the whole investigation.
So they couldn't definitively link the parents to the crime.
That's the thing with this case. Nothing is definitive, despite years of intense scrutiny and even a grand jury indictment for child abuse. John and Patsy Ramsey were never formally charged with JonBenét's murder. The evidence, or I guess you could say the lack thereof, just couldn't conclusively tie them to the crime.
But if not the parents, then who? Did they ever consider any other suspect?
Of course they did. There were other individuals who came under suspicion, some very briefly, others a little more extensively. And there was one investigator in particular, Detective Lou Smith, who really strongly believed that the evidence pointed away from the family and toward an unknown intruder.
Okay, hold on. We'll get to that intriguing development in just a moment.
Yeah, so Detective Smith, he was this really seasoned investigator who was brought in to kind of assist with the case, and he had a totally different take on all the evidence.
Okay, so what specifically led him to believe that an intruder might have been responsible?
So there were a few pieces of evidence that hadn't really been fully explored. Like, for one, there was a broken basement window, which Smith believed could have been the intruder's entry point. He also found this suitcase under that window, and he thought maybe the intruder used that to reach the window. And then there was also that unidentified boot print that was found near JonBenét's body. And that print didn't match anyone in the Ramsey family.
Oh, wow. Those are some pretty compelling details. Did Smith have any theories about who this intruder might be? Or a possible motive?
Sadly, no. The intruder's identity remained a mystery. But then in 2003, there was this pretty major development that seemed to support Smith's theory. They discovered some unknown male DNA on JonBenét's clothing.
Oh, wow. So that pretty much clears the Ramseys, right? I mean, if there's unknown male DNA, it had to have been an intruder. Case closed.
Well, not so fast. While that DNA evidence was definitely compelling, it really just deepened the mystery. Despite, like, tons and tons of database searches, that DNA never matched anyone known to the family or any profiles in any criminal databases.
Oh, so close yet so far. It seems like every time investigators got a lead, it just led to more questions.
Exactly. And then in 2006, this case takes another bizarre turn. This guy, John Mark Carr, he was a school teacher, just out of the blue confesses to JonBenét's murder.
Wait a minute, what? This guy just randomly confessed? What was his story?
Okay, so Carr's confession was full of all these graphic details and strange claims. He insisted that he had been with JonBenét the night she died, that her death had been an accident, and that he was deeply in love with her.
Oh my God.
The media, of course, went into a frenzy, but Carr's story quickly unraveled.
So, what happened?
Well, his DNA didn't match the samples they had found on JonBenet, and then further investigation revealed that Carr had a history of making false confessions, and that he had this really unhealthy obsession with the case. So his confession was ultimately dismissed as like a delusional fantasy, just another dead end in a case that was full of them.
Wow. Okay, so if Carr was a false lead, where did that leave the investigation? Were the Ramseys still considered suspects at that point?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. In 2008, based on new analysis of something called touch DNA, which is basically trace amounts of DNA left behind from skin cells, the Boulder District Attorney's Office made a huge announcement. They publicly cleared the Ramseys of any involvement in JonBenét's death.
Wow, that's huge. So after all those years of suspicion, they were finally exonerated.
They were, but it wasn't a completely clean slate. You know, despite the exoneration, the debate surrounding the case just raged on. Some investigators were still convinced of the Ramseys' involvement. They pointed to these inconsistencies in their alibis and behaviors.
So even with the DNA evidence and the exoneration, there were still doubts.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this case is just a masterclass in ambiguity. And even with, like, seemingly concrete evidence like DNA, there's always room for interpretation, you know, for doubt to creep in. And then there are also those nagging details, those unanswered questions that just continue to fuel speculation and all those conspiracy theories.
Okay, so like what? What were some of those lingering mysteries that people just couldn't let go of?
Well, for one, there was that mysterious 911 call that Patsy Ramsey made when she reported JonBenet missing. Some experts claimed they could hear a third voice in the background, this really faint whisper, and some people speculated that it could have been JonBenet's brother, Burke.
A third voice. That's chilling. Was it ever confirmed?
No. It just remained this point of contention. Was it Burke? Was he awake and aware of what was happening? Or was it just a technical glitch, like just some phantom noise on a grainy recording? People are still debating that to this day.
Wow. What about that missing paintbrush piece from the garage?
Yeah.
Did they ever find it?
Nope. It's a small detail, but it could be significant. Did the killer take it as like a trophy? Or was it just overlooked, lost in the chaos of that crime scene? It's just one of those loose ends. A reminder that there are still pieces missing from that puzzle. And then, of course, there's that high-tech boot print that was found near JonBenet's body. Just like the DNA, it never matched anyone known to the family.
It's like they had all these clues. DNA, fingerprints, a boot print. But the killer was just a ghost.
It's incredibly frustrating, isn't it? And in recent years, there's been this renewed push to use advanced DNA technologies, like genetic genealogy, to try and finally crack the case. I mean, it's the same technology that's been used to solve other cold cases by identifying suspects through their distant relatives.
That sounds promising. Has the Boulder Police Department been pursuing that avenue?
Well, it's been a point of contention. Some people have criticized the Boulder Police Department for their handling of the case from the very beginning. They cite things like the contamination of the crime scene, the focus on the parents, and all the missed opportunities to gather evidence. And their apparent reluctance to really embrace these new technologies has only fueled those criticisms.
So are we any closer to finding out what happened to JonBenét? Or is this just one of those mysteries that will haunt us forever?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think that's what makes this case so enduringly fascinating. It's a story that challenges our assumptions. It forces us to confront the limits of what we can really know, and it leaves us grappling with this uncomfortable truth. That sometimes, even with all the evidence in the world, the truth can remain just out of reach.
It's like we have this giant puzzle, right? And it's missing pieces. And then some of the pieces we do have just don't quite seem to fit. We've got this DNA evidence, handwriting analysis, a bizarre ransom note, and then a crime scene that just seems staged. But it really yielded very few concrete answers. So, where do we go from here? How do we even begin to make sense of all of this?
Well, it's tempting to want to force all the pieces together and come up with a neat and tidy solution. But honestly, the truth is that this case may never have that kind of resolution. And maybe that's the most important takeaway here. The JonBenét Ramsey case is a really stark reminder of the limitations of evidence, the human element that's in every investigation, and the fact that sometimes, despite our best efforts, the truth can just remain elusive.
It's a humbling thought for sure. We would like to believe that with enough science and enough investigation, we can solve any mystery. But this case really challenges that notion.
It really does. It forces us to confront this reality, that sometimes we just have to live with the ambiguity, with the unanswered questions. And that's something that I think we as a society really struggle with.
Yeah, and it almost feels like the JonBenét Ramsey case has become this sort of cultural Rorschach test, where people just see what they want to see, and they project their own biases and beliefs and theories onto this narrative.
That's such a great point. I mean, this case has been the subject of so many books and documentaries and podcasts, each one offering up a different interpretation of what happened, each one trying to fit those pieces together in a way that makes sense. And the fact that there is still so much debate, so many different theories, it just speaks to the power of this mystery.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also important to remember that at the heart of this story is a real tragedy. A 6-year-old girl lost her life. And a family was thrust into this really harsh media spotlight. And they had their lives just dissected and scrutinized.
Yeah, absolutely. Amidst all the speculation and theories, it's just so important to remember the human cost of this crime. JonBenét Ramsey was more than just a case file. She was more than just a puzzle to be solved. She was a daughter. She was a sister, a friend. And her loss continues to affect people even all these years later.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into this really complex and heartbreaking case, what are we left with? What can we really learn from the JonBenét Ramsey story?
Well, I think it serves as this powerful reminder of the importance of critical thinking, of questioning assumptions, and considering multiple perspectives. It teaches us that evidence can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, that truth can be subjective, and that sometimes the best we can hope for is to just understand the complexities of a case, rather than trying to search for one simple definitive answer.
Yeah, it really highlights the impact of media scrutiny. And public opinion on investigations, too.
Yeah.
And the challenges of separating fact from fiction.
Yeah.
And just the importance of seeking justice, while still respecting the rights of all the people involved.
And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that even in the face of these seemingly impossible obstacles, that the search for truth matters. Even if that truth remains elusive, it's the pursuit of it. The willingness to grapple with the ambiguity, that's what keeps us engaged. And that's what keeps us striving for a more just and understanding world.
Well said. The JonBenét Ramsey case is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most enduring mysteries are those that leave us with more questions than answers. And that's okay. It's in that grappling, in that questioning, that we learn and grow.
Exactly. It's not about arriving at that definitive conclusion. It's about embracing the journey, the intellectual exploration, and just recognizing that some puzzles may never be fully solved.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. into one of the most captivating and perplexing unsolved mysteries of our time. We've explored the evidence, we've examined the theories, and we've grappled with that enduring enigma of the JonBenét Ramsey case.
And as you continue to think about this case, just remember to stay curious, keep asking those questions, and never stop seeking knowledge.
And that wraps up another deep dive. Until next time, keep those critical thinking caps on. And stay curious, folks.